Truey Conversations, giving the environment a voice.
Hi, and welcome to Truey Conversations. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're coming to you from and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm Kathy McLeish, a senior journalist and your host for today, along with Truey's Dr. David Waters. Hi, Dave.
Kathy. Thank you.
I'd just like to get to sort of set the scene.
Yeah.
What's your definition of natural capital?
Thanks, Kathy. So my tweak on the textbook definition of natural capital is it's the renewable and non-renewable assets such as land, water, air, soil, and all living things that we value environmentally, economically, socially, and culturally. Now, the interesting thing is that when we've talked to different people from different industries, people have a different view on what natural capital means to them. And I guess that was part of our motivation for running the Natural Capital Truey Conversation series, is that it'd be nice to hear from people from different sectors and different industries and get their take on natural capital and how it impacts on them and their business and how they're incorporating it as part of their business.
Thanks for that, Dave. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Norman. Chris is the Chief Executive Officer of NRM Regions Queensland. In that role, he's worked to build the profile of the NRM sector in Queensland, including defining the value of that work for government and investors, representing the sector on a range of state and national forums, and driving impact monitoring through implementing the statewide indicators framework. Before joining NRM Chris was the CEO of the Goulburn Broken Catchment Management Authority. Chris, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Dave. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation as well. Yeah, my history goes back a long way, I guess. A bit scary when you reflect back. So I've probably been involved in the environment, sustainable agriculture, natural resource management sector for well over 30 years. The majority of that time actually in Victoria and the last 4 or 5 years in Queensland.
Tell us a bit about your role in the natural capital sector.
Yeah, well, I guess for me, natural capital is about our natural assets. So our soils, our biodiversity, our native animals and plants, our air, our water. And you know, I've lived in the sector and worked in the sector around environmental sustainability. So that's actually about protecting those assets and making sure that they are available and they're generating the ecosystem services that basically give us the quality of life, underpin everything to do with our life, our economy, our society. So, yeah, I've worked in that space for a long time and have seen things evolve over 30 years. And I guess that's part of the conversation I'm excited about today, is to talk about that evolution of the way people think about natural capital. You know, it wasn't a language. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, we've used lots of language over history around how we describe the natural environment. And I guess, yeah, natural capital now is the current lingo.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, how important is that part of the evolution in that we're now sort of forming that sort of common language around natural capital?
Yeah, well, I guess it's just the evolution of the way we think about nature. You know, natural capital is nature. 90% of people, I think, you know, nature is a stronger word to use because most people walking down the main street or wherever you live probably understands the word nature a lot better than natural capital or nature positive or sustainability, or the language we've used for a long period of time. But I guess the importance of natural capital is we're putting a value on nature. That's what we're talking about now. People that have worked in that sector for a long time have known the value and the importance of it. But most people living in our society don't put a value on nature because it's always there. It's a given. And I think what's happening now is we're actually economically putting a value on it, and we're putting an importance around it because we are in a state of degradation, and we do need to turn this around quite abruptly, the trajectory we're on. So I think using the word natural capital for me means politically and economically, we're starting to put a real value on something that for a long time we've taken for granted.
So, Chris, I know you're very passionate about M&E frameworks and developing M&E frameworks, and I know you've been a strong advocate of that for a number of years. In terms of putting a value on the environment, as you say, and reporting on co-benefits, have you seen a change in terms of state and federal government reporting for NRMs across Queensland or across Australia in that space? Have things changed pretty quickly as well to reflect what's happening out there in the real world?
Yeah, it has, Dave, in the last 3 or 4 years. Once we've made, I don't necessarily like the language around some of this, but once we've made nature a marketable item,
Yeah.
the world has changed a lot. So for the first 25 years of my career, every 5 years we'd come out with a new monitoring framework. We'd have a change of government. We'd have our own drivers wherever we were, and we'd create a monitoring framework about how do we measure the impact we're having on the environment. Unfortunately, because we continually change, we haven't been able to tell a very clear story. So one of the biggest issues I have in my sector is that we can't sit back after 20 or 30 years and say, this is the difference we've made, because we've changed the parameters, we've changed a lot of things. The last 4 or 5 years, through using language, natural capital, etc., new markets, whether they be carbon markets or ultimately biodiversity markets under the Nature Repair Bill that is being run through government now, we're now making nature a marketable item. Once you create money around an item, the importance and the amount of commitment and resources that go into it escalate astronomically. I don't think that's the right thing, but that's what happens. So now we've got this thing called natural capital market. We've got enormous investment around measurement, which we never had. Monitoring and evaluation was always the last thing you did when you wrote a project. It was the money you had left over at the end. You try to then fund some sort of monitoring and evaluation, which is why we're in the situation we're in now, where we can't tell a very clear story over time. But now, once we create a marketable item, then the accuracy and compliance around measurement is critically important. So we're now seeing, and the carbon market's a great example, where for years we couldn't measure anything. And suddenly now, because it's important to measure, we've got methodologies coming out of our ears around now we can measure everything. And I think the other thing that has changed, Dave, is that it was very much a science-based exercise this for a long period of time. And scientists, and I've been a scientist or am a scientist by training, tend to want to get everything 100%. So we didn't measure anything. We didn't communicate our measurement very well because we were scared that we didn't have it 100% right. And when you're measuring something like the environment, you're never going to get it 100% right because it's so dynamic and so variable across the landscape. So I think now we're a bit more relaxed about saying, well, we've got this pretty right and we need to measure it because we're putting a value on it and we're trading it. We're comfortable that we've got this degree of accuracy that's not 100%. So I think they're the other thing. That's the other thing that's changed a lot over the last relatively short period of time. I think, 4 or 5 years.
What do you see as the greatest challenge that the industry faces?
I think the greatest challenge we face is because we're putting a monetary value on nature now, there's a potential for that to have a perverse outcome. It's two ways, Kathy. There's great investment that's going to go into nature, which I think is absolutely wonderful, needs to happen. But as soon as you create any market, there's a risk that that market is gamed. So people start to game that. So, we use the language greenwashing, where people actually undertake activities to generate a nature positive outcome and what's good for nature, but it actually doesn't do that. It may, in fact, create the opposite to that. So that's our risk, is to make sure these measurements are true, that we are seeing investment in the right place, and we're not seeing investment because we're trying to make a stakeholder or a shareholder more money out of nature. That's the scary bit that I come from. And I've been a public service. So prior to working in the NRM sector, I was in the Victorian Public Service for a long time. So for me, the public good is my driver. My driver and my values are about trying to make the best for the public good, which is making sure that we do have fresh air, clean water, productive soils, pollination services, whatever those ecosystem services are for the next generation. I'm not about making money out of the environment. But we create a market. We're creating a market so people can make money out of the environment. So we've got to be very careful that that doesn't drive perverse outcomes. And we see activities and actions that aren't fair income, that aren't true, and actually aren't generating something that's a negative.
Is there something that you think is key to, is going to be key to kind of keeping it some sort of control on that?
Well, I think, again, because I'm an ex-public servant, I guess there's a critical role for government here. Government can't control everything, maybe like they've done in the past. But what they do need to control is the compliance and standards around this. Somebody's got to be the umpire here. And that clearly is the role for government, because government is about the public good. It isn't about, yes, it supports private benefit, but it's ultimately about public good. That's why we pay taxes. So they've got the responsibility to making sure that the standards are kept and that we are monitoring all this to make sure that there isn't a market driving a perverse outcome here, and that we are actually generating improvement in our nature, So they're clearly got a key role. Academia, scientists, researchers have got a really strong role here. Being an ex-researcher, and a lot of research doesn't end anywhere. I think now there's a real scope for research to really make a difference. That might be a bit harsh on a few academics out there, but there's a lot of research papers written that don't go anywhere. But now there's a real challenge to get this stuff right. And when I say right, the clock is ticking here. We are on a pretty downward trajectory around the environmental health, the health of the environment and the earth. So we do need to get this as right as can be, and we need to accelerate action on the ground. So, there's this tension there about accelerating, but also making sure that we're actually measuring the right thing and we are making the right changes.
Yeah, it's interesting your point. So a number of the speakers that we've had this discussion with have raised the same point as you, that it's pretty difficult, that we've actually we've got to try and find that sweet spot between having sound methodologies, but they've also got to be something that people can implement, and they've got to be still specific and measurable, but they've also got to be able to be implemented, and we haven't got a lot of time. So it's interesting that you bring that one up.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Dave, and I probably didn't touch on it enough, but the complexity around this, it isn't simple stuff. Otherwise, we'd have got this right for a long time. So it is about accepting that there's a degree of flexibility around some of this stuff, but we've still got to be on the right trajectory. But we've got to make it doable. Yeah, so we've got to make it doable. We've got to be able to measure, be confident with that measurement, and able to replicate that measurement in a cost-effective and time-effective way.
And I would imagine in your role as, CEO of the Queensland NRMs, you've got to get that money out in the ground and, getting it to see impact quickly and, minimise your transaction costs, but also be able to measure the impact and improvement. So I guess it'd be really important, I'd imagine, for you and your other NRM bodies across Queensland, that you do have something that can be implemented, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the statewide indicators framework has been being developed by our sector for probably the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
The trick for us also is that we are part of a national sector. So whilst I work as the peak body for 12 regional NRM organisations in Queensland, we are part of the 54 regional NRM organisations that have been in place for well over 20 years across the country. And we have a statewide indicators framework being developed in Queensland that isn't the same as everywhere else, because there's different drivers. The states drive the different programs different ways. And the Commonwealth also have their own monitoring program. So I tell my guys who are developing the statewide indicators framework, your number one job is to work out a way that we can align this measurement with other techniques. Let's not tie ourselves in a box where we've got one approach and everyone else has a different approach and we can't tell this broader story. So my challenge in Queensland is to get everybody using the statewide indicators framework, but then being able to link the statewide indicators framework through to other measurement frameworks so that we have some consistency of measurement here. And that's just us. That doesn't talk about what's happening in the private sector I mentioned before, with all these different methodologies being developed. How do we make sure these things can actually line up so that we can tell a collective story here?
So one of the questions we're going to ask you is, well, where would you like to see things in 5 years? It sounds like you've partly answered that. You'd like some sort of nationally consistent framework. Am I right?
Well, yeah, a nationally consistent framework that talks to each other. I think I live in a fantasy world if we're going to have exactly the same methodologies. I've lived in this world a long time where the Commonwealth have a change of government every 5 years. They bring out a new methodology. It takes 4 years to get it embedded because there's all these different players, all these different states, and then we change again. So I keep saying, can we have some sort of methodology that can somehow align and we can tell a consistent story of the same sort of data? That's what I'd love to have. My other prompt when you gave me that question, Kathy, and you gave me that question was, I want to see society understanding nature and valuing nature. That's my real hope in the next 5 years. So you turn on Home and Away on a whatever night it is, every night of the week at 7 o'clock, and there's a story around nature and the value and the importance of clean air, fresh air in the narrative all the time. It's not something that's just given. Home and Away lives on they film it on the coast, don't they? So marine health and the importance of oceans and reefs actually are weaved into that story as so nature isn't a given. Nature is a part of everyone's thinking, and we all have to contribute to nature being something that's going to be here for the next generation. That's my aspiration for 5 years. I can do all this other stuff that keeps me busy, but I just want to see nature being valued for what it is and not taken for granted.
What about greatest opportunity for the industry, Chris? What do you see as the, you know, the opportunities for the industry?
Yeah, I hesitate a little bit because we always say the opportunity is more money. And so we whinge a lot about not having enough money. The reality is that we need more resources. If we're going to value nature and investment in environment can't be 1.3% of GDP investment. That's ridiculous. We spend more money building a bloody submarine than we do investing in nature. It's crazy. And also, nature also generates a whole lot of other positive economic outcomes. So when you just invest in nature, you're creating jobs, you're recognising traditional ecological knowledge and First Nations contribution. You're doing a whole lot of extra things beyond just that investment. So the opportunity, I think, is around complementing the investment by the public sector, the government, with the private sector. So in Australia, the Wentworth Group last week brought out their blueprint for natural resource management and investment in turning around the degradation of the last 2 centuries in Australia. They valued it, so I think it's $7.3 billion a year, something like that. We in Australia, we probably have about $500 million investment in the environment. So there's a big gap. There's a massive gap. Government is saying to the private sector, you need to pick up some of that gap. That's correct. But again, it's about how we complement that and how we invest in a lot of the programs. We reckon, and we know the answers to many of the problems we've got. We've got programs in place that evolve for 20 or 30 years. Yes, they can improve, etc. Our biggest issue is we can't roll them out across a large enough scale quick enough because we don't have enough investment. Plus also, in Queensland, 88% of land is privately owned. And we keep forgetting that. We've got to work with our farmers. They've done an amazing job over a long period of time, feeding us high quality food, as well as trying to sustain a natural environment. We need to work with farmers to get an uptake of change in practices very rapidly across private land. Yeah, of course we can do public land, but government manages that process. But the large majority of Queensland is privately owned land. We've got to get them on the journey with us and invest in them. And that's where some of the markets will come through because they'll be able to invest, they'll be able to participate as they are in the carbon market, but they'll be able to participate in the nature repair market and get an income for doing things that they've traditionally done, but never been invested in by anyone else except themselves. So the work they've done around soil erosion, waterways, etc. We need to accelerate that and we need to invest in it. So, you know, a clear example is waterway health. We need ideally 100-metre buffers either side of our waterways. When I was in Golden Break, and we used to concentrate on trying to get 30, but we probably need more than that. But we've got to compensate farmers for that. We're locking up land that previously they saw as agricultural productive land, so they should be compensated for that. They should be that's public good. So we need a large amount of investment to really create the change that I think we actually know what we need to do. We've just got to do it at scale with the amount of right investment behind it.
It sounds like and absolutely, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity, as you say, for philanthropics and private investment. But I think the NRM bodies across Australia will be critical to get that money onto the ground quickly because they've got the systems in place and they have the processes. They're ready to go to get that money where it's needed on the ground. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm biased, Dave. I'm going to say that, aren't I? But I guess, we have been in place for a long time now. We've got entrenched relationships with many of the partners. There's many players in this space, and so there should be. Not the least our First Nations people who have got a lot of history, a lot of knowledge around the landscapes that we need to continually embed and build into the way we think about things. We have in Queensland about 340 staff across 27 locations. You take that to a national thing where we've got nearly 2,500 staff across well over 100 locations. So we're very embedded across the landscape. We're pretty well trusted because we're not seen as government and we're not seen as private. So we sort of play this fine balance between private and public. And we've been implementing these things for over 20 years. So we think we've got a major role to play in the evolution and delivery of these programs, but so have many other people as well. We're not the only ones, absolutely not. And our partnerships and working together is going to be absolutely critical over the next 20 or 30 years to turn this trajectory around.
Chris, if you had, sort of one key point on natural capital, what would it be?
Oh, I think my key point is, this is about valuing nature. This is about what we've taken for granted for a long period of time. So putting a value on nature. And if that drives increased investment, then that's a good thing. And how we manage that investment then is the critical, to make sure that we actually maximise the value out of this exercise. The money goes in the right place. So for us, the money needs to go to the people that are managing the land. So landholders, we need to support that. We need to be able to measure. So, the role that Dave and his team do with Truey in helping the modelling of where do we invest best and how do we make sure that we're actually monitoring the change and communicating that to people. Let's communicate to people where things aren't going that well, but where things are going well. Let's start telling that story so that people don't take nature for granted, that it is part of their thinking and, part of their voting, I guess, too, selfishly.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris. It's been fabulous to talk to you and, really explore some of these challenges and the opportunities for this sector. And we know it's something we really have to get onto, don't we?
Absolutely. So, thank you to Dave and Nick and Truey for instigating this sort of conversation, because the more time we have this conversation, the more that it starts to resonate with people and particularly the next generation. The next generation have got enormous challenges in front of them that we've left. It's really critical that we do a lot of stuff with school kids and the youth of this world as they're coming through, so that we do have a beautiful, prosperous, vibrant landscapes and communities going forward.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for your time. And I truly believe, as I said, that NRMs across Australia play a crucial role in, as you said, giving the environment a voice, because you've been there for a long time and you know how the system works and you've got your connections across the country. So thanks.
Thanks to you too.
Truey Conversations is brought to you by Truey. We create data-driven web applications that give the environment a voice. Thanks to our host, Kathy McLeish, and our regular contributor, Dr. David Waters. Our producer is Kelly Fisher. Our graphics are done by Tash Venz. I'm Bonnie Marsh, co-founder of Truey, and I really hope that you've enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you very much for being here with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time.